Imagine a world where fear is the only language that matters, where loyalty means nothing, and even family bonds are broken in the pursuit of ultimate power. This is the story of a people who live by this code, a code that turned them into the most hated and most dangerous nation in history. This is the story of the Mongols. The Mongols are often misunderstood. Most people know them as ruthless killers and uncultured brutes who burned entire cities to the ground. Yes, that's true, but there's more to them than meets the eye. To understand who they were, we must go back to where it all began, the vast steppes of Central Asia. Here, amidst the wind-swept grasslands, there lived many different nomadic tribes. These tribes survived by herding animals and moving with their flocks. Life was hard. The winters were brutal, and food was scarce. There was constant struggle to stay alive. But these people were strong-willed and fiercely independent. They lived according to their own laws and answered to no one. That is until the 13th century when a new leader rose among the tribes. A man whose name would strike terror across continents, Genghis Khan. At first, his name wasn't Genghis Khan. He was born Temujin, which means of iron or steel. But the title Genghis Khan came later when he unified the tribes and became the ruler of all Mongols. This was a huge deal because before Genghis Khan, the Mongols weren't a nation. They were a bunch of separate clans, fighting for survival. But under his brilliant leadership, they were transformed into one of the most feared empires in history. So how did he do it? Well, Genghis Khan was born into the Borgajit clan, one of the many Mongol tribes. When he was born, the tribe's chieftainship was disputed. As a result, his family suffered greatly. His father was poisoned, and his mother's family abandoned him and his siblings, leaving them to fend for themselves. Temujin and his family struggled through years of hardship and exile, but Temujin never gave up. And in 1206, he finally achieved what his father had set out to do, uniting all the Mongol tribes under his banner. The newly proclaimed Genghis Khan established a new capital at Karakoram and set about the task of transforming his people into an unstoppable force. He reorganized the tribes into a powerful army, introducing accounting rules, creating ranks and positions, and instituting punishments for crimes. Loot was no longer allowed and plunderers were put to death. Most importantly, he developed a legal code called Yasa, which served as the foundation for the Mongol Empire's legal system. Yasa covered everything from crimes to social order to the rights of women. It was revolutionary for the time and helped to stabilize the empire. But perhaps most importantly, it established a single identity for the diverse Mongol people. They were no longer just a collection of tribes, but a nation. The Mongols. Now that they were united, it was time to conquer. Genghis Khan's military genius was unmatched. He was a brilliant strategist and his tactics were both innovative and terrifying. One of the most important elements of his military strategy was his use of terror. He wanted his enemies to be so terrified of the Mongols that they would surrender without a fight, and he succeeded. In fact, the Mongols' reputation for cruelty is somewhat exaggerated. Historians believe that less than 5% of those conquered actually died during battle. The rest either surrendered or were executed after resisting. For example, the city of Baghdad, the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, was one of the most important cities in the Muslim world. But in 1258, it fell to the Mongols. They slaughtered thousands of Muslims, including many scholars and scientists. They looted the great libraries and destroyed countless manuscripts. But not everyone was killed. The inhabitants surrendered, they were allowed to live, though under Mongol rule. Still, the destruction of Baghdad was one of the worst disasters in Islamic history. But even this is not the worst thing that the Mongols have done. You'll hear about it soon. Okay, now let's get back to the video. While Genghis Khan was a brilliant strategist and tactician, he was also a gifted horseman and archer. He led his armies from the front, charging into battle with a bow and arrow in hand. His warriors were equally skilled, able to ride at full speed while firing arrows with deadly accuracy. But the Mongols' greatest advantage was their mobility. They were masters of the horse and could travel across the vast Eurasian landmass faster than any other army. This allowed them to strike suddenly and unexpectedly, devastating their enemies before they even knew what hit them. They would appear out of nowhere, attack, and then disappear again, leaving their enemies confused and demoralized. This made them virtually unstoppable. But the Mongols' military genius was not limited to the battlefield. They were also skilled engineers and architects. They built impressive cities and fortifications, such as the city of Karakorum, which served as the capital of the Mongol Empire. They also constructed defensive structures such as the Great Wall of Mongolia, which protected the empire from invaders. Genghis Khan's empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe. He conquered everything in between, including parts of China, Korea, Central Asia, and the Middle East. After Genghis Khan's death in 1227, his empire was divided among his sons. The resulting fragmentation led to civil wars and power struggles, ultimately causing the collapse of the empire in the mid-14th century. But despite its relatively short duration, the Mongol Empire left a lasting impact on the world. It was the largest contiguous land empire in history, covering an area of over 24 million square kilometers. It connected east and west, fostering cultural exchange and trade along the Silk Road. Under Mongol rule, ideas, inventions, and goods flowed freely between distant lands, influencing art, science, and technology. But it wasn't all positive. The Mongols were responsible for the deaths of tens of millions of people through warfare and conquest. They also faced criticism for their treatment of conquered populations and their disregard for cultural differences. Despite this, the Mongol Empire remains an important chapter in world history, highlighting the power and impact of nomadic peoples and the lasting legacy of Genghis Khan. So what made the Mongols so dangerous? There are three answers to this question. The first one is speed. The Mongols were master horsemen and archers. They could travel long distances quickly and fire arrows accurately while riding at full speed. Their armies moved faster than any other armies in history. They used this ability to strike their enemies by surprise and crush them before they could mount a defense. The second answer is ruthlessness. Mongols believed that their enemies should be terrified of them, and they did everything they could to instill fear. They were known for their brutality and willingness to burn entire cities to the ground. And they left a trail of destruction in their wake as they conquered vast areas of Asia and Eastern Europe. The third answer is organization. Despite being a nomadic people, the Mongols were highly organized and disciplined, had a strong central government and a well-trained military. They also developed a legal code and a system of accounting. This helped to keep their empire together and allowed them to function effectively as a single unit. The Mongols were an enigma. They were both destroyers and builders, bringing death and destruction wherever they went, but also opening up trade routes and spreading ideas and inventions across continents. They were a force of nature that changed the course of history. But what really makes them so fascinating is that they remind us that even the most powerful empires eventually fall. The Mongol Empire was the largest land empire in history, but it didn't last forever. It crumbled due to internal conflicts and outside pressures. This teaches us that no matter how powerful an empire is, it can never last forever. The Mongols may have been one of the most dangerous nations in history, but they were not invincible. They, too, had their weaknesses and ultimately met their demise. They serve as a reminder that no empire is truly invincible, and that change is the only constant in the world. We hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new about the Mongols. If you did, do not forget to subscribe and click the bell icon to get notified when we release our next video.
Thanks for watching.